Good morning once again. So we are the second act after DPM. It's going to be an exciting one. It's going to be a 1-hour panel discussion, 45 minutes to answer the questions that I have for this great panel, and 15 minutes for more questions. Now, we have an excellent panel here with us today. I'll do the introductions shortly. But my job is to try and extract the most value out of this great panel, and I'm sure I'll do that with your help. So although this is a panel that doesn't need any introduction, I will still go through short introductions for everyone. We'll start with Miss Euleen Goh, who is, she's a trailblazer really for women in corporate leadership. She's currently chair of the Singapore Institute of Management and a member of the Singapore Public Service Commission. Right? She was the first Asian to sit on the board of Shell, where she was deputy chair, actually, and until July 2024, this year, she was chairman of SATS and also formerly a director of Singapore Airlines and DBS Group, right? And next we have Ms. Caecilia Chu, co-founder and CEO of YouTrip, and she also sits on the board of SGX-listed iFast, and also on the board of NUS Institute of System Science. Last but certainly not least is Dr. Jeffrey Jaensubhakij, who is Group CIO of GIC, the Government Investment Corporation, and has been so since 2017, and oversees GIC's total investment portfolio. And he's also a member of the Board of Trustees of SMU and a board member of Quantedge Capital Management. So as I mentioned, it's an excellent panel. Round of applause, please. Thank you. Okay, great. So we're going to extract as much value as possible out of them. I'll start with my questions. I should introduce myself as well. As mentioned earlier, I'm CEO of Quantedge Capital. I also sit on a couple of boards, amongst them National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, the Esplanade, NS Square, Kickstart, and also Council for Board Diversity. Right, so to kick things off, shall we look at the results from the first survey question? All right, here we are. The question was, the business and operating landscape is ever evolving, we know that. What are the key issues that your board of directors is most concerned about at this moment? Right, so I've got it on screen here, quite an even split. Disregarding others, which could be a lot of things. We've got economic uncertainty, inflation, obviously. The big one is the next one, geopolitical risks. I think that's something that we're all worried about since you can never predict how things are going to go. But these are just sort of an idea of what is top of mind for many board members. I'm going to start with some questions now. First two questions for, I think, Jeffrey and Euleen. All right, the business landscape, geopolitical climate is increasingly uncertain and volatile. I think Boon Chye mentioned them just now. He rattled off a list of things, Cold War, or hot war even, inflation, AI, cybersecurity, climate risk, the list goes on. So I'd like to ask Jeffrey, first of all, what is the most pressing issue and risk that weighs on your mind today as a business leader, and why? And do you think there are any other great opportunities that come to mind as well?
Sure, thanks very much, Suhaimi. I think the survey actually had listed a lot of things, all of which are pretty important. Whether it's politics and geopolitics, whether it's technology. Nobody made a vote for climate change, but it is a pressing issue also. And I think all of this wouldn't matter so much. All this heightened uncertainty wouldn't matter so much if there wasn't also heightened valuations in a lot of markets already. So if you take credit markets, for example, credit spreads globally are very tight, which means that the market doesn't think that companies will not be able to repay their loans and so on, and bonds. And yet, we have all this heightened uncertainty in front of us. US equity valuations, even European equity valuations, Japanese equity valuations are also at decade highs, despite the fact that we have all of this heightened uncertainty. So for me, I think what this means is that if there is a catalyst, if there is a trigger for any of these risks to actually eventualize, then there could be a lot of volatility in the financial markets as a result of this. And then, that volatility in itself will then drive further reaction and creating uncertainty in the environment in which we operate. Maybe one quick way to think about this is that today, actually inflation that's priced in globally is only about 2.25%. Not a lot. And yet, we have all these things that could lead to increased inflationary risks. So first, there's the geopolitics are driving, tariffs are driving relocation of what were previously very efficient supply chains, all of which means you're going to the next less efficient supply chain, the more expensive supply chain, and that is inflationary in itself. We've heard that we're waiting for the next political result in the US, but every political result that we've seen has resulted in more populist policies, meaning that governments are more and more concerned about whether they're going to remain popular, whether they can get re-elected. And their answer to everything is more fiscal expansion. At a point in time when fiscal deficits are already very high, government debt levels are already very high, and as you know, that is quite often very closely linked with inflationary risks. And so if you have inflation, then the interest rates, which today only price in 2+% inflation, maybe we'll have to price in 2.5, maybe price in 3. But you'll remember that in 2022, that increase in inflation had already led to central banks having to react. So I think that is a good example of the kind of risks that are out there, but are not priced in at all.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think that the big message there is big risks, perhaps underpriced, perhaps underestimated. Euleen, your views on this?
Well, firstly, good morning, and I'm honored to be on this panel with my panelists here and with all of you. As I look at the name list, I have to say that many of you have got much more experience and a lot to offer. So it's not just from me, perhaps this is just a sharing platform. And that leads me to say that whatever I'm saying today would be in my personal capacity. We didn't plan this, but I have to say that everything that Jeffrey says dovetails nicely into what I'm going to say, which is not to repeat what Jeffrey has said, but everything he said talks about the type of risks that we confront today in the marketplace and in our operating environment. And you think about it, we've always faced risks, but in today's times, it's the speed of risks that we should worry about. Think about how CEOs have turnover. In the past, it might be 10 years, 15 years. Today, 5 years later, CEOs change. It's the speed of risks that we have to confront. Secondly, it's the complexity of risk. And Jeffrey talks about it. Geopolitical tensions brings, and the wars brings about disruptions to supply chain. Disruption to supply chain and trade flows means that costs might change. So there's a complexity, and they're all interlinking in factors. And the third thing is, in the past, we could look back and say, this was what it was, and therefore we could learn from our past and look forward to the future. Well, the third thing about risk is that it's non-linear. So with all that, let me boil it down to what, as I think about it, sitting on the board, we have to think about. As we confront this risk, it is not that we have to look at one risk or two risks or any risk that particularly stand out. I think more importantly is that as a board, we have to think about three things. One, people and culture. We've got to make sure that our leadership is strong enough, our culture is fundamentally sound, so that we can withstand whatever risks we confront. Because we just don't know what risks are going to come before us. Two, is the compass and the navigational map. We've got to make sure that we have a compass good enough, a navigational map, that we have a sense of where we are going. We have a purpose for what our company is for. And that's very important. And then three, we've got to have a radar screen. Today, we've got to have a scanner big enough to know, to kind of have a view as to what's happening out there. And that's the biggest thing that we as a board have to think about. Not always to look internally, but to look externally. What's happening out there that we don't know about? So I would say these three things occupy the minds of the boards that I sit on. People and culture, compass, and our navigational map, and thirdly, the radar and a big enough scanner to have some view, as big a view, as broad a view of what's out there. Long answer, but...
Thank you. No, it's fantastic. It ends off with sort of distilling the three things that you should think about. However, the way I think about it, those three things are great for you to keep an eye on, to make sure you're going in the right direction long term. Now, the question I have for Caecilia, maybe I'm reserving the hardest ones for Caecilia, but even if you have those in mind, right, as a CEO, it's not just about where you end up long term. There's a lot of pressure, dealing with reporting, in the short term. How do you balance those two? Short-term needs, the demands of the different stakeholders versus, your long-term goals and ambitions.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here this morning. It's truly a privilege. So for me, I think anyone going into a business as an entrepreneur, as a founder, often means that we have a contrarian view and perhaps unique insights into a problem that we really, really wanted to solve. And obviously, in my case, that is really about solving the problems around making payments. For myself, I grew up in a very modest background. My father was a postman, my mother was a kindergarten teacher, and I grew up in subsidized housing in Hong Kong. I remember when I was 5, my dad wanted to get a small loan to start his own business. He was rejected by every single bank that he spoke to, and at that time, we have more than 100 banks in Hong Kong. So when the opportunity came to start YouTrip in 2016, 2017, to me, I quickly realized that it was actually my life mission. My life mission is to create a financial institution that no matter how much or how little money my customer could show me in their account, I'm going to treat them all the same. Always the best product, always the best price. And this kind of business plan actually doesn't sit well with many of the VCs and financial sponsors, right? They will be scratching their head and thinking, why would anyone put money behind a business model that has such terrible margins, charge basically no fees to consumers. And I remember that for the first 5 years when I was starting YouTrip, I got rejected perhaps more than 200 times by all sort of different investors. And the journey to get there was incredibly hard. Of course, fast forward to today, 2024, we really have built a brand that many of our users absolutely loved. And we got into a scale which allowed us to operate profitably. But the journey was long and tough. But what I truly believe from day one had never changed. I think doing all sort of short-term calculations might feel safer in the short term, but only by focusing on the long term would allow you to create something truly, truly special. Okay,
fantastic. I want to stick with you for a bit, Caecilia. Since your company sort of went through COVID, actually, I mean, many of us have forgotten COVID, dreadful period as it was, but I think for your company, it was a young company at the time, right? So you had to survive COVID and then quickly pivoted to now one of the fastest growing fintech companies in the region. So can you talk us through that period? But specifically, I'd like to find out, were there any sort of really tough decisions that you had to make, which in hindsight you think either made your company what it is today?
Yeah, so during COVID, it was a very dramatic time for us. I remember that was March 2020. We have been operating in the market for only 5 quarters, so about 15 months old. It was March that year, and I remember we lost about 90% of our business overnight, because obviously no one is traveling, so why use YouTrip? I remember the toughest moment at that point was not just the fact that all the international borders were shut, no one was traveling, the world stood still, but the toughest part really was there's no end in sight. So we knew we needed to reinvent ourselves just to survive, really. And the first place that we looked was actually the user data on our transaction platform. we discovered that there's a small pockets of these super users who keep maxing out their wallet limits. If some of you have signed up YouTrip for a few years, you would remember that back then, it was 3,000, 5,000. The limits was not very high. And, we decided to give them a call and see what are these users doing. And at that time, we couldn't meet them in person, so we need to speak to them in a Zoom screen. So over the Zoom screen, these people would actually hold a whole stack of colorful cards, and would be screaming at us and say, "Hey, how come your transaction limit was so low?" And and then the more we talk to them, we realize, oh, these are actually small and medium-sized business owners who have been using our card to save on FX, to receive, to send money much cheaper across the border. And so, that was truly a aha moment for us, that we discover we could actually do this as a new business line. So we took the next 8 months to completely create, now we call it UBiz, which is our SME spend management platform, which issue multi-currency corporate cards. We took 8 months to completely build this from scratch. And I think we are just very grateful when we look back that we have uncovered a new business segment for ourselves. 2 years into launching this product, we have more than 7,000 businesses onboarded onto that platform. And it is really one of our growth driver for the company, even in a post-COVID world.
Okay, thank you. I think symptomatic of many startups, I guess, quick thinking and moving on to new products. I want to stick on the original question that I asked you, though, about big decisions and changes. Jeffrey, Euleen, do you have anything to add to that? Any decisions that have been made, right, in the companies that you've been on, Jeffrey also for GIC, that I think have really sort of charted the way forward for the company and really made a big difference?
Thanks so much. I think maybe if I could comment very quickly on Caecilia first, though. Obviously very encouraging to hear your business journey, but so important that you're focused on something that gives the customer value, a reason to stick with you, a reason to use you, and the profits can flow after that, because you can go on and figure out what your cost structure needs to be and so on. But if you don't focus on that customer and the value that you're giving, actually there is no revenue to come. So I think that to me it's a great encouragement and a reminder, even as we look at companies that we invest in. I think in terms of big decisions, I'd like to say that when we look at companies to invest in, and we sort of say, what does the board look like? What does the management look like? There are two things that we look at. One is, are they making good decisions today? Meaning that, are they optimizing the cost structure or the way that they reach the customer and so on and so forth. But more importantly is that we know that the environment for them will always change, right? There's no business environment that's static. And the question is, how good is the management at reacting to, maybe even anticipating the needed change and being able to effectively restructure their company in order to do something better, as the environment changes. And for us, companies that have been able to show that in one or two decisions gives us the confidence that in the future, if we're going to invest in them for another 5 years, 10 years, as the environment changes, they're able to do that as well. So I think for me in GIC, I mean, one of the things that probably we've evolved the most in is that we've gone from what institutional investors normally think of as the starting mode, which is a strategic asset allocation, right? Which is you sort of start off by deciding what asset classes, what countries you must be invested in, and then you sort of say, well, let's stick to that because that's what worked in the past, and so long as things return to the mean, we should always stick with it. Unfortunately, things don't always return to the mean, and conditions really change. And therefore, making a decision to say that I need to move away from strategic asset allocation to really try to think in the future, where are my returns going to come from, and to move flexibly towards that was a big decision that we made internally, that our board, after multiple conversations, really supported. And it's a recognition, I think, of the environment that is changing, this ability to change. And it did mean that we had to restructure the ways in which we made decisions internally, the cadence of relooks at the portfolio and so on had to change as well.
Yeah, fantastic example there. I think these are some big decisions where, especially, you won't see the returns immediately, right? You've got to be patient and invest and wait, right? Euleen, you got anything to add?
Firstly, again, this kind of fits in with everything, and I'm just going to share the SETS example. Like Caecilia, frankly, tough as COVID was, we now look back and say, actually, we are grateful for that journey. Firstly, because it's caused us to re-look at our business model and ask ourselves, what will change? Secondly, we were, when COVID first started in February 2020, we were the first company to go out with 2 fixed note issues because we knew our market was going to fall away. So as Caecilia, 90% fell away. We were in the aviation sector, 95% of our business fell away. So we went out, we got 2 notes issues, we took enough money, 400 million, we didn't know how long it was going to be. People thought that would be like SARS, real deep V shape, but we just couldn't take the risk. So short term, make sure that we cover ourselves for the short term and had enough reserve to last us through. Then, during COVID, we had enough reserve, we had the wherewithal. We used that period to put in operating systems, get our database digitalized. We bought the central kitchen in Thailand because it had frozen food and we could serve it to our major customers, so back to customers. And thirdly, we knew we had a compass, we knew what we needed to grow our business, and it's got to be all customer based. We weren't going for scale's sake, we were going for a strategic fit that enabled us to serve customers around the world because we could serve them at both ends. And so we bought Worldwide Flight Services, 2 times our size, and today we are bigger in market cap than we were when COVID first started, despite our business falling 95% away. And here's our learning. The first is that we were always debating very clear strategically where were we going, strategically what's the right fit for us. We weren't just grabbing whatever came on board, but we were clear what our fit was going to be. Secondly, we knew that our investors were not particularly patient. GIC might be different, and indeed they are different. I give them credit for it. But a lot of institutional investors are not patient. Therefore, we have got to make sure that we are collectively clear that we could execute and execute well. That was very, very important. And that we had a team that could execute to deliver. We had to get through the short term, but in the longer term, we could execute. And we have shown that actually in the last year and a half since integration. But the third thing, and the most important thing, and remember what I said when I first started, the most important thing is that we were in a position where we were uniquely advantaged. During COVID, few of our competitors had the wherewithal to go out and buy a company like Worldwide Flight Services. It was over 2 billion Sing dollars, almost 2 billion euros. Few had that capacity to do so. With that unique advantage, we could negotiate price, we could negotiate conditions, and we could execute knowing that there were no peers or competitors that was going to jog us or going to, cause us to pay expensively. And we could take that on, which we did, and did it successfully. So sometimes going through these risks is not such a bad thing. Going through a crisis is not such a bad thing if we use that crisis to our advantage. But one last word, do not overstretch. We took on a company 2 times our size. We had to get through the short term for the long term. And so we lined up all our support from our shareholders to bankers and so on to make sure we could get through the short term to get onto the longer term.
Wow, excellent. I do want to drill a bit deeper, right? And say, I mean, look, when we look back in hindsight, in the rearview mirror, all these big decisions, which turn out to be good decisions, seem like, it's just a logical and easy thing to do. But obviously, as we go through it, I'm sure the conversations at the board level must have been difficult. There must have been a lot of tensions. Can you tell us a bit more about how you, as chair, perhaps handle dissenting views?
Clearly, obviously. But you know what? I see dissenting views as constructive discussion. We must have as broad a discussion as possible because we want to have as much insights as possible. And frankly, we must have a range of foresights so that we are prepared for what's out there. So dissenting views are not such a bad thing, provided we all come to constructive decisions and consensus on how to move forward. So absolutely, I do encourage dissenting views. And by the way, I forgot to say one thing which Suhaimi had rightly asked. The most difficult decision that we made during COVID was that we had to shrink. We had to shrink. 95% of our business fell away. We are grateful to the Singapore government because they helped all companies. We kept all our Singaporean staff. Our overseas staff we could not keep, but we did one thing. Those closest to us, the large bulk of our overseas staff were from Malaysia. They crossed the border every day. Many of them have crossed the border for 20 years, 30 years to come and work with us. We paid them a stipend on the basis that when we open for business and we reopen, they would be the first that we recall. And indeed, they were the first that we recall. So we had to find our way through those difficult decisions. But I would say this, don't look down on dissenting views. They are good views. We take it positively, we take it constructively.
Absolutely. I'm going to take a pause now and look at answers to survey questions 2, 3, and 4, which if you've done your survey, you'll notice that they are related. Same question in essence, right? With different types of organizations in mind. The first one is company boards, right? Listed boards included. And then the next one will be, I think it's charities, followed by statutory boards. So let's take a look at this. Quite interesting statistics, which you'll see on screen. For the first one, company boards, let's pause there for a minute. What are the in-demand skills? Or disregard the others. I think they would include a lot of different things, but strategic decision-making, obviously. Inspirational leadership amongst the top. ESG, I think, is a big one, as everyone grapples with definitely public pressures and reporting requirements. AI, digital cybersecurity skills, all right? So quite obvious answers. Let's look at the next one, which is on charity boards. All right. With charity boards, it seems like maybe the options provided are not as accurate, right? But we've got strategic decision-making still at the top. But what features differently there, as you see, is fundraising, change management, but cross-sector collaboration being also a very big one, because I think in our charity space, certainly, we rely on collaboration with government and private money. Next one, on statutory boards, which many of you are on, we've got strategic decision-making, communications being an important one, stakeholder management, because we're doing work for the community, but the other points are the same. Okay, so bear this in mind while we go through the next segment, which is about board diversity. Ready? Okay. First question is for, let me see, I've got a question here for Euleen again. Or maybe I'll start with Caecilia first, okay? As you know, Caecilia is a startup founder and CEO, continues to be the CEO of that growing startup. I'd like to ask, actually, your experience on the board of iFast. What do you think are the different expectations they may be, right, from the board, from your board, from you as a, basically probably the youngest on the board and the one who's most tech savvy? What are the expectations from your board?
I think it was, really fantastic experience for me so far. I would add that actually perhaps counterintuitive, but I don't behave too differently on the two boards. First of all, let me perhaps share a word about iFast. iFast is a tremendously special company. It is still run by the founder and CEO today, and to me, he is an extraordinary and very inspiring individual. And the reason why I joined the board was twofold. One is I saw this aligned interest in building a financial institution that is ambitious, that is fast-growing, that is entrepreneurial in culture, and growing across the region. And the second reason is that I actually felt a level of trust where I felt the voice of a founder, the voice of a fintech executive is wanted. And these are really some of the reasons that I realize I don't have to be somebody else. I can just be myself, performing my duties on that board. But of course, having said that, being a publicly listed company as they are, the decision-making process, the governance, information disclosure, there are many more layers of structures and committees. And I believe they exist for good reasons. So my perspective is actually to take some of these learnings and lessons back to my growing company. And I really want to make sure that we have robust internal systems and procedures as we continue to scale and progress and grow across the region. So so far, it really has been a great experience. I have one of my colleagues in the audience today, and I'm just tremendously grateful for the opportunity and very, very proud of iFast.
Thank you, Caecilia. Euleen, let me ask you a question in your capacity as a board chair. Now, we've talked about skill sets on the board, but maybe let's turn the question on board chair. What skill set do you think is most important from the board chair? What makes a good board chair, in your opinion?
For the board chairman, is that it? Let me start by saying that I've served many board chairs, and I've learned from every one of them. It's always a pleasure for me to sit at a board meeting and see how a board chair handles sometimes dissenting views, sometimes board members who don't quite get it. I would say that a good board chair is, he was one of the, I served 3 chairmen when I was on Shell, so he was one of the chairmen on Shell, was a very nurturing, coaching chair. And he gave a lot of time to call directors, particularly the new ones. And his question is, what's on your mind? How can I help you? And he would coach as to how questions can be coached. How questions can be phrased. He would coach on helping to understand the issues at hand. And he gave a lot of time behind the scenes, nurturing and helping to develop each of us in our positions as board members. I think that was very good. Secondly, a board chair should be one that welcomes all questions and has a way of respecting and regarding all questions. Because a board chair that turns down questions or tries to limit it is actually limiting the values that the board members can have. I had one board chair who had a mallet. He's not Singaporean, he had a mallet. So this is an overseas board. And he ran to time. And he would just bang the mallet and say, okay, and let's get on to the next discussion. And we really never had satisfactory conclusions from it. So the second board chair would be, the second item would be one that encourages discussion. And the third, and most important for a board chair, is the ability to bridge board and management so that there's mutual respect and there's mutual consideration for each other's views. I think if that came about, then there would be a good board system that makes the whole bigger than the sum of the parts.
Wow, awesome. Speaking about systems, Jeffrey, turning the question to you, similar question, I guess, but again, in your world, right, in the investment decision-making sort of function that has to be played within GIC, how do you manage the views between, I don't know what you call them, PMs, CIOs? I'm sure everybody has a view. How do you manage all of that and get to the right consensus, if you may?
Yeah, I think I would first reiterate what Euleen said about the value of having diverse and dissenting views. You know, in investment, by the time something becomes a consensus, it's well priced in the market. And so, you know, if you have an investment committee that has consensus, usually it's because it's the most comfortable thing available, and it all looks good, and so on. And usually the seller also knows it looks good and so can extract a good price. So it's fully priced in. And so the dissenting view is very important. And in fact, in some cases, investment decisions are probably best not made by committee. And so there are you know, some investment decisions that we kind of reserve for a PM to make, and we don't have him or her have the team kind of reach a consensus, because by that time it would be difficult. I think getting the dissent is difficult. You know, we've got a large international platform with lots of international staff, but ultimately still a very Singaporean company, a very one that respects the elders and the senior management and so on. And so extracting that dissent is very difficult. We have some mechanisms whereby we have outside, you know, either board directors or outside advisors who can give that kind of alternative view, because the internal one may well align too quickly with management. But also we try to encourage people who dissent by showing that actually dissent does not have any negative career outcome. But, you know, we may not agree with the dissent always, but the career progresses and so on. So I think things like that, anyway, we try to do to encourage that dissent.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to ask now in the context of startups, right, Caecilia? Decision-making within startups often thought to be a lot faster, right? You do want to move quickly. How does it differ? What do you think of the pros and cons, based on your experience, right? Running YouTrip versus, you know, what happens on the board of a SGX-listed company?
I think you know, while you know by default we'll be able to make decisions faster just because we have less number of people, but not to say they are not you know, as important. I remember one of the mega break decisions that happened to us, and by the way, there are so many throughout the journey, and the earlier stage you are, the more make or break life or death situations you tend to run into. And one of the experience that really stood out to me was in 2018, when we actually need to, you know, it was actually the year that we just launched in Singapore, and we need to figure out our market expansion plan. We'd identified Thailand to be our second market within Southeast Asia. And after speaking to all the big and small local companies, potential partners, we decided that we want to go with the largest bank in the country. Caecilia Bank. And to put things into context, at that time we were a very small company. We have been operating in Singapore for less than 1 year. We have raised $5 million in total funding. We are a team of 25 to 30 staff. And Caecilia Bank obviously was a tremendously successful organization. 25,000 employees, you know, have 25 million or 30 million of customers. And the challenge there was immense. And it wasn't just difficult to strike a partnership with such a huge and complex organization, but the toughest part really was that we are also limited by our own resources and cash runway. So, you know, making a wrong bet of that scale could very much jeopardize our own existence. And what it means is we could lose everything that we have built so far. You know, but I think that decision was truly important to us, because when we first started, we really want to build an important institution, and we knew we need not only top-notch products but also world-class partners, and that's something that we do not wish to compromise. And so we really go for it. And I would say very, very lucky. 4 years into running this partnership until today, we are the undisputable #1 multi-currency program in Thailand, which is also a very competitive banking ecosystem. And my personal perspective on making difficult decision was that the entrepreneurial journey was difficult, but it will only be worth it if you allow yourself to make some truly bold moves and pursue goals and objectives that your heart really desires.
Thank you. You spoke about your board being smaller at YouTrip, right? Maybe you can expand on that and tell us, actually from the perspective of, and we're diving into the topic of diversity a bit more now. So from the perspective of diversity, what do you look for? What do you think a startup would look for as opposed to big corporations when it comes to diversity? What are the most important skill sets?
We really wanted diversity of opinions, insights, experience, and that is really because in a startup, scenario situation, we actually don't know what the future holds. We don't know. So we want the smartest people who dare to speak up, who dare to share their view, no matter whether or not we disagree or agree with each other. So we are very, very grateful. In my board of a private company, we have 2 founders, 1 male, 1 female. We have 2 independent directors, and also 1 investor, and the investor director was also a female. So I would say we have the most diverse board as a private company, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. And Euleen, I want to ask you this question. And we all know, and what's been said quite often is the value of diversity on boards, the different perspectives that are brought in. I'd like to know your view as to whether that can ever be problematic in a sense, right? Is there such thing as too young, too inexperienced, or irrelevant experience? I don't know. I mean, diversity for diversity's sake, are there problems?
It's a good question. And I don't believe in diversity for diversity's sake. And for that matter, so I'll say it now, it's a personal view. I don't believe in fixed ratios that are regulated. So the French, for instance, have fixed ratios. And so they do get females on board, usually very high-level executives. But these high-level executives don't have time. They just don't have time. And when it comes to time when a board meets, they are too busy with their own roles. Usually they are CFOs and they have to worry about their own financials. So I think the more important thing for diversity is to bring in people who are committed, who would bring in diversity of views, not afraid to speak up, as Jeffrey has said, be diverse and be dissenting in views. I think that's most important. Whilst gender diversity is a very obvious diversity factor, in some businesses, ethnic diversity is important. In some businesses, age diversity is important. If you are serving, a whole clientele of customers who are of the younger generation or coming through the younger generation, then you need to know how your customers think. So I think having that diversity is important. So that's 1. 2, I think having first-time directors is helpful. They are going to bring you a freshness of view that you may not have thought about. So that's important. And 3, that diversity of having people who are different. Quite often boards say, when they're looking for a director, I want someone who's got board experience. I want someone whom I can trust. I want someone who's a team player. I think you see often enough when you see advertisements for, I'm looking for these board members. I would suggest to you that we need to rethink that. Because by the time you have ticked off those boxes, you are going for people who go to the same clubs, go to golf games with you, go to the same restaurants, and importantly, they read the same articles, they read the same news sources, they read the same books. So actually, I believe that diversity should be people who would bring in different views, diverse views, different experiences, different attitudes, because that's important for your people. I think that's where having that diversity of people come in. Can a board be too diverse? Maybe. I think this is for the chairman to look at the board each time a board renewal is required and say, so what are we looking for? What skill set are we looking for? What views are we looking for that would add to the complement of what's on the board? So I think that's where I would come in for diversity. Look broader.
Thank you. I think we've heard that we've made quite big strides in terms of gender diversity, and we are trying to improve diversity all round on boards in Singapore. So final sort of question before I open up to the floor, and this is a question for everyone, but I'm going to start with Jeffrey. What do you think is holding companies back from getting that greater diversity on boards? And what do you think we, CBD or everyone else, can do or should do to change this?
Yeah, I think that two things. So one is that a demand problem. So if the chairman and if or chairperson and the CEO want their own kind and so on, then you will have a less diverse board, and that I think unfortunately is still very much the case, because people want to work with people they're comfortable with. The second, though, is a supply issue, and the number of whether it's kind of ethnic minorities or women who have the right level of seniority and expertise that people can then quickly identify and say, oh, I need that for my board, is less than 30% in the market, if you will. And so I think certainly within GIC, one of the things we think about a lot internally is how do we support the 50% of women that we recruit at the undergraduate level to then be able to rise through the ranks, achieve the same kind of experiences and breadth of experiences, to make them suitable, for executive positions within our company, but therefore, make them suitable for board positions elsewhere. So I think that supply issue is something that at least financial industry definitely is still quite bad. Other industries probably better.
Ever the economist, always going back to supply and demand. Euleen, got anything to add to that question? How do we engender more board diversity? What's holding us back, if anything?
I think, I agree, Suhaimi, I think it's our mindset. I would, and I've often spoken about this, I think as board chairs, if you are NC chair in particular, I don't think we should be averse to first-time directors. I think they'll bring fresh views that, would really add to your discussion. And I like what Jeffrey is saying, that for corporates, it is helpful that corporates try and make sure that they are nurturing their staff to senior positions. And actually, I would promote that corporates should encourage their senior staff to take one board seat at least. Because actually it's helpful for executives, senior executives, to understand what it's like to sit on the other side as an independent director. Because they will get new views and I think new experiences to help them in their executive positions.
Caecilia, your thoughts?
I thought, to me, seeing is believing. So, I think we certainly love to see many more role models in Singapore. Even within YouTrip, we are a 50-50 gender balanced workforce. Not very common from a tech company perspective, but I think, hopefully as being one of the examples, we can encourage more companies not to be afraid to try it and make some bold decisions.
Thank you. All right, so let's move to Q&A now. We've got just about 10 or so minutes. I'm sure there's some burning questions. Let's get a mic to, yes, on that side.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Grace, YTL Star Hill REIT Management Board. Thank you for an interesting and insightful discussion. In the spirit of learning about navigating change and creating opportunities, perhaps the panelists could share an example of an unpopular decision that you had to take either as a leader or a board member. How did you manage that? What was the outcome? It would be great to learn from you. Thank you.
Okay, so we let the panel members think for a bit. So the question was about an unpopular decision. How is it managed? How do you convince people? And what was the outcome?
So I can think of two, which were the most difficult. And the first was during COVID. Like I said, we had to shrink. It was unpopular for us internally because we did not want to see colleagues whom we have worked with for many years, committed to the company, have to leave us. But I think survival is key. And so we did, and the rest is history, because actually we got many of them back after COVID. So that was important. The second decision was less about unpopularity, but much more around the debate of strategic direction. I talked about SETS and WFS. I'll leave that aside. I'll give you a second example. And this was Shell. So in the about 10 years ago, Shell decided that you would buy British gas, because we believed that in the transition to renewables, gas was going to be a very important part of energy. Same thing, Shell had a unique advantage. We had the muscle to go buy and make an offer for British gas. As we made that offer, we were wondering whether predators would come in. Then share prices fell. And that was a big discussion. So it's history. I'm not telling you anything that is sensitive or not known in the public. Prices of energy fell. And we had a big debate, less about unpopularity, but a big debate. Should we carry on? Should we go on to do so? And we decided that strategically it was still the right direction. Our investors, as I said, impatient. They agreed that was the right strategic decision, but wondered whether we had overpaid. So what did they do? They sat on the sidelines. They waited to see whether we'll be successful. Years later, we are successful. One of the best moves that Shell made, because gas is so important in today's energy mix. And you know what? The investors all piled back in. So you have to understand that institutional investors who make the difference on your price are not always patient, but they might sit on the sidelines. They may not walk away. They may if they like your strategy, they'll sit on the sidelines. And when you show that glimmer of success, they'll pile back in. So just be very sure of two things. Firstly, survival. Make sure that you can get through the short term. Secondly, make sure that strategically you have clarity of mind that this is the right direction. You have the right conviction to do so, the right courage to do so. And thirdly, communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Awesome, thank you. Can we have the next question, please?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fan, and I'm from Institute of Singapore Chartered Accountants. Firstly, thank you CBD, Mildred, Buncha, and Wendy for putting all of us together in this room. And thank you, panel, for sharing a lot of insights. I think today we have covered a wide spectrum of topics, and I thought it would be also good to cover this last topic that not often talked about, which is self-care for leaders. And I think today's expectation on leaders is a lot, almost expecting leaders to be able to walk on water. But after all, I think leaders are human too. So my question to the panel is, what do you do to practice self-care to maintain your mental wellness?
Can I speak to? I think having three things. I think having a strong family bond is important. So if my wife didn't support me, it's very difficult to go to work, or if I had problems at home with my kids, it's very difficult to be mentally focused and at work. So I'm very thankful for that. I think having a spiritual foundation for many people is very key. It's a kind of a root that kind of sinks deep, and can gather water even when it's dry out on a run. And then the last one is, actually, if you have a mentor who's not linked to your business, it's also super helpful. And I've found that being able to speak to someone without them also being involved in the same situation to be profoundly helpful.
Caecilia?
I don't have a good formula, but there are a few things that I would do. Number one, to play with my kids. I have a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, so they just keep me really busy and they look very cute. Number two, I have date night with my spouse every single Friday, ever since we had been married for about 11 years, and we never took break. So unless it's absolutely life or death situation, if it's just a work situation, we say no. Most other things we say no, we keep our Friday free for our date night for 11 years. And thirdly, just reserve me time. I always felt that as a startup founder, CEO, everyone kind of want a piece of you. So making sure that I reserve me time, it's just as incredibly important.
Awesome. Thank you. Euleen, anything?
I would just detour what everybody has said. What particularly outstands for me is just having mentors. I have mentor, and I mentor as well. So and as I mentor, I also learn. So I think that's quite an important support, because sometimes, quite often the mentor gives you a fresh view of thought that you may not have thought so as you are sunk into that position. So I think that's very important, as our family and friends and
Awesome.
faith.
Of course. Maybe two more questions. We've had two from that side of the hall. Anyone from here?
Since we have a distinguished panel, maybe worthwhile asking a more difficult question. Over the last 20 years, if you look at the STI, the index have actually moved very little. I don't have the specific number, but I think it's less than 10%, or maybe less than 15%. That's one perspective to look at. The other thing that many years ago, I did a calculation as well. We looked at all the 800 stocks on the STI as well, on the stock exchange. And we found out that less than 15% of companies generated a return on capital of more than 10%. Okay. Now that speaks something about, and it's also a responsibility of the board as well as management to understand what's causing this. So maybe the panel can enlighten us a little bit about what they think causes this.
So as GIC is not allowed to invest in Singapore, I will. I'm not going to punt the question, but I would say that actually our surrounding stock markets have not done that much better. So the last 15 years, the average ex-India return is about 4%. And there are many reasons for it. One is that reinvestment has not been done very well by a lot of companies that have generated profits and then just reinvested. So that's why the return on capital is so low, and so on. And that is both a management and then a corporate governance problem. And if the corporate governance, the board is not good, management can kind of reinvest poorly at will. And I think that for us is a reason why we think about activism as not a bad thing. If the activist is long-term and really tries to get the companies that have good investment opportunities to take them, and if not good investment opportunities, then don't reinvest it, just give the money back and so on. So I think that's one. The second is that actually I think a lot of companies are still run at operating margins that are well below peers in the US or in Europe and so on. And there's still a lot of self-help that we can do. And you know, whether it's through digitization and finding cost efficiencies that way, finding ability to tease more out of your data and therefore be able to find better revenue sources or better ways to reinvest. Actually, all of that, we're still, you know, across the region, not at the high level. And then the last one is that most of the regional markets are pretty small in themselves. And the cross-border ability for a great company, let's say in Thailand, to take on the market in Indonesia and so on is not that easy. And so, you know, ASEAN, for all that we like about it, is a market of several countries and not a single market. And I think anything that can be done to help overcome that, you know, some of it is self-help, you know, like Caecilia's company. But the more that can be helped, actually, the better for us.
I think Jeffrey said it all. I'll just add one thing. I think our markets, I've got to be careful what I say, because I'm on the advisory panel. So this is my personal view. I would just add one thing to what Jeffrey has said. He's really said it all. And that is that as investors in this marketplace, too many of our investors are risk averse and look only at yield stocks. So you want your companies to pay you as much dividends as possible. But maybe we should also rethink that and ask ourselves, where are the growth stocks? And support those growth stocks. Because it's the growth stocks that is going to give you the extraordinary return, not the mundane return that you get today. And we need to be able to help our investors think growth, understand where that's going to come from, and make choices around that is what I would say in terms of our marketplace.
Thank you, Euleen. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I know there are probably other questions, but we are out of time. So I'm just ask one quick question and quick answer from everyone about the advice, the one piece of advice you may give to this great audience here for people who are assuming the role of board chair, whether for the first time or for the second time. What is the one piece of advice that you would give them? What can they do to improve their board? What should they do better to help gender board diversity?
So I remember a couple of years ago when I first joined, you know, some of these boards of very established, very successful organization. I actually, well, and also I tend to be on the minority side where I'm younger in age, lower in experience, you know, and also a woman. So I remember I felt quite intimidated in some of these situations. So the advice that I would give, and perhaps I would constantly still reminding myself a lot of times, is just know that your voice, your experience, your opinion is very much needed in the room, and that's why you are there.
Jeffrey?
I think that you know, in the 9 years or whatever the term limit is for the chair, there is an opportunity to take the company where it wouldn't go if you know, you didn't take that opportunity, and I think to work with management to decide, you know, to do something to really, you know, help the company or the organization to take it to where it could be in 9 years' time.
And finally, Euleen.
Thank you. Firstly, I would say to Caecilia, she sure ticked a lot of boxes. She was self-effacing, but to tick a box of young, female, technology, knows where she's going, she ticks all the boxes. But let me say this. I think firstly as board chair, and frankly if you're a board director, my personal view is I never try and outsmart management. I take the assumption that they know their business. And my role as board chair or board member is to try and broaden the horizon, help them to see what's out there that they may not know about. So don't worry about trying to be smarter than management or trying to think better than them. So I would say that's the first thing. The second is being an influencer, exactly as Jeffrey has said. And I think that the board chair's role as an influencer it's very important to set the compass, i.e., know where we are going, to have the conviction, and to have the courage. And if we can inspire both the board and management team to the right purpose, to the right direction, with clarity, lots of discussion, but come together collectively and collaboratively. What I've always said is you want the whole to be bigger than the sum of the parts.
Oh, what a perfect ending. The whole is a bigger part, sum of the parts. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening in. This has been a great panel discussion. Round of applause, please, for my panel members. Okay. I think there was a ton of stuff shared there. I won't even attempt to summarize it. We'll probably send you all an email summary of all the things that you can learn from this event and also what you can do. So thank you for your support for the CBD. This is the end of the panel discussion and the end of today's event, essentially. So I want to thank all of you for taking time to join the Council for Board Diversity. I trust that you've enjoyed the program today, but please give us your support as we continue to spearhead the efforts to encourage organizations on their journey to leverage on board diversity for greater business value and to enhance the value of organizations on the exchange as well. So please feel free to stay on in the room and chat with your friends, make new connections, and coffee and tea is available upon request. Thank you once again. See you again soon. Thank you.